Brian, if we think of God, is God someone who changes, is different in any way now than he was at a prior moment?
That depends really on the answer to a prior question, whether God is in time. If he's not in time, then he can't change because he has no time to change in. His whole life is as if it were just a single instant, and nothing changes in an instant.
Is it absolutely impossible to have change without time?
Yes. The reason is this. When something changes, first it has a property and then it lacks a property. First I had the property of having hair, now I lack that property, or I'm certainly far along the road toward absolutely lacking it. The only way something can both have and lack a property is if it has and lacks it at two different times. First I had hair, then I lacked hair. I couldn't both have and lack hair at the same moment. That would be a contradiction.
So if God is not in time, then God cannot change.
Right, right.
Now you believe that God is not in time. Therefore, I assume you believe that God cannot change.
That's right, that's right.
Now, some people would believe that God not changing is very good, is even a perfection, is the term. I'm not sure I understand that or even would agree with that if I do understand it. Can't change be good?
Change certainly can be good, but that's because change is moving from a lesser to a better state. If you learn something, that's a good change, but presupposed to that is that first you didn't know it, you were ignorant. It would have been better to know it and not have to learn it.
Yes, I certainly can understand that, but isn't the process itself of improving a desirable one in any state?
Could you flesh the thought out?
I'll tell you. The process itself from going from one state of knowledge to a different or higher state of knowledge, even though you have to start with not knowing something, isn't going through the process and enduring that and enjoying that and experiencing that improvement, isn't that a good that God would not have?
If there is something good about it, then God wouldn't have it if he's outside of time and can't change. A lot of what's involved with the goodness of learning is developing skills. And again, the skills are useful to continue to learn things you don't know. And it's a good thing to feel yourself acquiring the skills because you feel yourself growing to a better state. The question is whether the goodness of simply being in that better state to begin with is better than the goodness of growing into it and feeling yourself expanding in your knowledge and so on. I'm not sure, there are goods involved in both cases, and I'm not going to try and argue that one is a better good than the other because I'm not sure I could give you a really good argument for that bit of what I have to say. When you're thinking about what God's perfections are, often you find yourself having to make a choice. He can have one perfection or he can have the other, he can't have both. And you just have to use your best judgment as to what you think the best package of perfections would be. What I'd want to argue is that the timelessness, the outside of time package of perfections is better overall.
But there is some limitation. There are some logical contradictions with God, so he can't have all kinds of perfections because some are just
incompatible
with others.
Right, right.
Well, that makes very good sense. So let's continue on the theme that God cannot change, which means God is outside of time. This is your belief. Doesn't that limit God's capacity to interact with human beings? I mean, it means nothing you can do, it would seem, can have any impact on God.
I wouldn't think so. It's more a question of what you might call the timing of the impact. God knows everything that I do. If he's in time and changing, he sees one thing, then he sees another, then he sees another. And he reacts to each one of those. If he is outside of time and not changing, he sees it all at once. And in a certain sense, he determines his reactions all at once.
It doesn't diminish our capacity to have a relationship with God. If you believe in God, I would think all religions value this kind of relationship between the created and the creator. For God not changing seems to diminish it. I mean, it's like a stone wall. I mean, a stone wall may be very strong and powerful and it protects me from something, but I'm not making any impact on it.
Then God outside of time isn't a stone wall. We're having a dialogue and a relationship. And what makes that happen is that you're responding to me and I'm responding to you. There are two things involved in the response in our case. First, you hear me and then later you make your response. Second thing that's sort of bound up with that very closely is because you hear me. Because I speak, you hear me. Because you hear me, you respond. So there are two relations involved. There's the because relationship and there's the relationship of temporal sequence. First I speak, then you hear, then you respond. What I would want to argue is that if God is outside of time, you have the because relationships without the temporal sequence. I speak, because I speak, God hears me. Because God hears me, he triggers a response. But it's not the case from God's point of view that one happens before the other.
They're both happening in the same instant?
Yeah, yeah.
And that in no way diminishes this personal relationship?
The personal relationship, I would argue, depends on the because, on the fact that you are really hearing something because I'm saying it, and something happens to me in return because you want it to happen. Say you speak a certain answer to me.
If I'm trying to really understand a relationship to God, and I do, I mean, I would really like to know if God exists and what kind of relationship. I mean, it's an inner passion, an obsession we all have, and I think that's good to have that. But if I'm thinking in myself, do I believe in God? Do I want to have a relationship with God? And then I hear you, and nothing I can do can change God. Maybe he knows in this becausal relationship that he can know what I'm doing and give it. But if I can't affect God and I can't change God, my side of the equation is less, and I'm not as happy.
Okay, you have to distinguish between changing God and affecting him. It's possible to affect something without changing it if your effect, without changing it, makes it different than it would have been. God eternally, timelessly hears you. Because of that, because he hears you, he's different than he would have been had you not spoken. But he's always been in that different state. Let me just state that. You have not changed God by speaking, but you have made him to be as he eternally and timelessly is. And had you not spoken, he would have eternally and timelessly been a different way.
That's not so easy to understand. One can understand the words and not really feel the essence of the real impact. So you're affecting God without changing God because God was always the way you affected him into.
See, suppose God is in time, but he sees the future, as many people think.
Sure.
And, okay, then 10,000 years ago, God saw you having this conversation. So your having it now doesn't change his cognitive state. He's always, as far back as he was there and was foreseeing you, he was always in that condition. But you account for the fact that he was in that condition eternally, back through time, as we're now supposing. He's always known, always seen you doing this. Because of that, you've always had an effect on him, but you've never changed him. He's always been in the state.
So you're saying it doesn't make any difference, that if God is in time and knew exactly what I was going to do, then he was in that condition because he knew what I was going to do, or if he's not in time, he's instantly in that condition. So I'm always not changing God, but I am affecting God.
I'm saying in this respect, there's no difference. You can relate to a timeless God the way you would relate to a temporal God who foreknows what you are going to do.
Yeah, some people, though, who believe that God is in time would say that God knows a lot about the future, but the future is open, so to speak. That God really doesn't know back 10,000 years ago what I'm going to say to you now. And he knows maybe some general things about the world, or he could force things to happen, which he won't do. But he's kind of waiting for me to get here to say this, and then he'll literally will be changed. So in the structure that you have given me, that God is not in time and that God doesn't change, whereas God can interestingly be effective in this causative way, the impact that I'm really having on him is actually less than in a different way, that if the future were really open, there would be more of an impact on God.
If the future were really open and God was in time, you wouldn't just be making God to be in a certain state he'd always been in, you would be changing him. That would be more of an impact.
And to me, that feels like a better personal relationship. Not to you?
Honestly, no, but I can understand your feeling.
Okay, why not? Why don't you feel that same way? You would have exactly the same personal relationship with God if God was in this timeless state, knowing exactly everything instantly, than if you had a literal effect in making God changed in some way based on what you're doing.
What I want out of a relationship with God is that he knows what I'm about, he cares what I'm about, and he responds to me when I speak to him. As I understand response, it doesn't matter when he makes the response. It's a response. I mean, look at it this way. If you're one of these open future people and you believe that God doesn't know the future and he responds to you when he first finds out what you're doing, well, the important thing about that is that it's a response. I don't see why it's being a change should affect how you feel about God.
So the issue of God changing, how important is that in one's understanding of God?
In and of itself, I don't think it's very important. It's a consequence of timelessness, of God's being outside of time, and I do think being outside of time is an important thing. So it has a secondary derived importance that comes from that.
Because I think one can feel either comfortable that not changing is a perfection, and at the same time one can feel uncomfortable that God is so unchanging that it's so far removed from the way we have these relationships.
Should we really expect everything about our relationship to God to mirror everything about our relationship to another human being?